Thank you, thank you. It is a honor and a pleasure to be here with you all to celebrate GLAD. I had dreamed many, many years about being able to thank GLAD and the many organizations that, had led the fight that inspired me. Excuse me. The reason that I had only dreamed about it is because when I was 18 years old, I was out in the streets as a young transgender woman trying to make my way in society. And to try and make my way, I began to commit criminal acts of using credit card numbers and writing bad checks. And eventually I got caught. And being black and trans and having got caught for doing something wrong, they wanted to teach me a lesson. And so to teach me a lesson, I got a 50-year sentence. And I was, at that time, 18 years old. I went into the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and immediately I was horrified by the conditions and abuses that was being subject to our people and to inmates in general. I don't know if you all might remember, that was back in the 80s, and at that time it was the height of the AIDS epidemic, and inmates were being segregated, they were being spit on, urine was thrown on them, and I just said this is not something that I could stand for. And I was inspired not to stand for it because I knew that organizations like GLAD was out here fighting so that we did not have to stand for it. As a consequence, I filed my first lawsuit at the age of 19 in federal court. And at that time, there was a lot of hatred and they were just making up things. They were at that time saying that, well, all gay people have it, and you can get it just by being in the elevator with them. And so these were the arguments that they were making to have my lawsuit dismissed. Of course, before I could get through with that lawsuit, there were other issues that were popping up. Issues about public strip searches, issues about housing, issues about mistreatment, issues about abuse. And before I knew it, I was just overwhelmed with issues. And I wasn't really one to remain silent because I think all of us know that when you remain silent, it just ends up in a disaster because and even though I didn't remain silent, I still suffered disasters because I was in the inside, which is very different from being in the community. I had nowhere to go when people abused me or mistreated me. I could only fight back with the law, file lawsuits, file grievances. And so when I did that, I ended up getting retaliated against, and that retaliated ended up in disaster, being transferred from one prison to another, and eventually being transferred to a violent prison where I was brutally beaten and raped. But, I continued saying that this is something I cannot stand for, because it was not only happening to me, it was happening to many of my brothers and sisters on the inside. And so I decided to file another lawsuit. And I tried to get the court to understand that when you place a transgender young woman in a violent institution, that rape is inevitable, harassment is inevitable. And I did that by writing over 100 paragraphs in my complaint. But within 2 weeks, the court threw that complaint out. And so I filed an appeal, but eventually I was able to get the Supreme Court to accept my case and to actually agree with me that prison officials should know that certain inmates, LGBTQ inmates, young inmates placed in certain institutions are vulnerable, and that when they fail to protect them, that they are liable. Thank you. After Farmer versus Brennan, I was bombarded with inmates' requests for assistance, and the requests for assistance were numerous. And many of them were from our brothers and sisters, even transgender women, transgender men that reached out to me who had been silent for years, but now wanted to fight. And so I became a fixture in the law library, and before I knew it, I had a full caseload of inmate cases. However, I was not deterred because I knew that, that the fight had to continue, and that, I was inspired by GLAAD and other organizations that were out here fighting the opposition. As I said, in the 80s, they were making up things saying that you could get AIDS just by being in the same elevator. And they are still making up things. And as you all may know, over 70 anti-LGBTQ laws have passed, taking away fair policies. And it's just good to join GLAAD and other organizations now that I am free to fight against and oppose these laws and to fight for our equity, dignity, and humanity. In fact, I was especially happy and inspired to work with GLAAD and work with Jennifer Levi. On the case of Keisha Williams, which is a recent case of a transgender woman who filed suit against the Virginia Department of Corrections. And y'all will hear more about her case later, but that case was recently affirmed by the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. And so, excuse me, you know, it's just important that we remember that the opposition will just continue to make up things, continue to introduce laws, continue to strive to strike down all that we have worked for. And so we need organizations like GLAAD on the job 24/7. And I am just honored and feel just privileged to be a part of GLAAD and being on that job. And I just thank you all for helping us and joining us in doing it as well. Thank you.